Assuming you've spent anything more than about 30 seconds on the internet, you've probably encountered at least a few conspiracy theories, as well as their various supporters. Perhaps you may even be one of those supporters. It's popular today, and they have been popular in the past too, including during the Cold War. Plenty of conspiracy theories have grown around John F. Kennedy's assassination, about UFO sightings, and I have no doubt that at least a few of you out there have already started typing comments about the moon landings being faked. Now, most of these theories seem to originate in the United States, but the other side of the Iron Curtain had its fair share of conspiracies as well. I'm your host David, and today we are going to look at some Soviet and Russian conspiracy theories, perhaps somewhat less well known, but not at all less bizarre and wild. This is the Cold War. So, a word on conspiracy theories. They are convenient, a way to explain the unexplainable. Financial crisis, natural and man-made disasters, pandemics, wars, poverty, unemployment, political persecution. The world can be a bitter and frustrating place. People who get the short end of the stick are left to wonder why bad things happen to them. And the reasons could be many: poor judgment, bad management, someone's evil intent, or just bad luck. None of these reasons, however, seem to be as attractive for many as a conspiracy theory. They are an all-powerful tool, able to explain everything if you don't bother treating them critically, often because we simply don't have all the facts. The idea that we are victims of a planned and coordinated attack can seem far more attractive an explanation compared to the idea that either we lack information or that sometimes shit just happens. We also can't overlook that many conspiracy theories turn out to be a way of blaming disliked groups of people. It often doesn't require a lot of digging to find the blame for something being laid at the feet of, well, the Jews, for example. And if you are one of those people who blame Judaism for the perceived ills of the world, you should go find a different video and channel to watch. Or maybe just go outside and touch grass. At the end of the day, conspiracy theories tend to be about a desire to feel in control of a situation where control isn't possible. Okay, with that said, let's get into it. Russia, through its many forums, has a rich history of conspiracy theories. For example, if you look at the list of her rulers, you will notice a figure from the late 1500s named False Dmitry I, an imposter monarch who claimed to be a son of Ivan the Terrible. The original Dmitry died as a child, but according to the fake Dmitry, he miraculously survived and eventually came back to reclaim his throne. There's been at least 3 false Dmitrys, with one of them even becoming the Russian Tsar. A similar pretender, Yemelyan Pugachev, started a rebellion a century later. He claimed to be Peter III, a Russian emperor who had been deposed and then died, supposedly under mysterious circumstances. Tens of thousands of people stood under the banner of the fake emperor and took part in one of the worst civil wars in Russian history. Elsewhere, Pugachev's adversary, Catherine II, was exposed to Russia's first classic conspiracy theory, foreign plotting. Her court poet, Vasily Petrov, authored a poem which he wrote to celebrate peace with the Ottoman Empire. In this poem, Petrov claimed that Western powers have concluded an anti-Russian conspiracy, jealous of her success in the global arena. Apparently, this notion never quite left Russian political circles. This conspiratorial thinking continued throughout the imperial period. The loss in the Crimean War furthered a Russian distrust of the West, while the growth of cities made it much easier for rumors to spread. Some Russian intellectuals, and sometimes the Russian government, were often eager to use fear-mongering to consolidate public support. The others were presented as enemies of Russia, conspiring to bring the empire down. In this atmosphere rose the most notorious of all Russian conspiracy theories, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. This fabricated text and its consequences for Russian Jews is a whole different topic to cover, and probably not one for the Cold War channel, largely because I don't have the time or patience to deal with the inevitable anti-Semitic idiots in the comments. Okay, so let's move on to the Soviet period. Despite the Bolshevik ideals of fighting superstition, conspiracy theories fit well into their doctrine. The young Soviet state viewed itself as a fortress under siege, which the bourgeois, capitalists, and counter-revolutionaries conspired to destroy. Not only was any dissent considered part of this conspiracy, any negative event in general was regarded as a foreign plot. Engines didn't break down on their own, it was all sabotage. Needless to say, this spy obsession was used to justify one terror after another. For example, by the late 1940s, Joseph Stalin had started to believe that there was a group of doctors conspiring to kill him. After purging these doctors, he of course couldn't get adequate medical attention after suffering a massive stroke, and soon after died in a puddle of his own urine. Following Stalin's death, the level of killings resulted from conspiratorial thinking calmed down, but the conspiracist thinking remained. The Cold War gave plenty of reasons to look for spies and other nefarious groups. This naturally had a cultural impact, as propaganda loved the narrative. In books and movies, brave KGB officers confronted CIA and MI6 agents and their accomplices, who conspired to destroy the Soviet motherland, but of course these foreign agents always failed, and the sword and shield remained triumphant. Not every conspiracy theory had to be political, however. Soviet citizens exposed to mass surveillance, state repression, and media censorship learned to be suspicious of each other as well as the government. Paradoxically, they were often eager to believe in urban legends and myths, which the Communist Party allegedly tried to conceal from the public. One such myth was the so-called killer yeast. The legend originates from GOST 17181, a technical standard which listed the raw materials necessary to produce, well, yeast. The list included sulfonol, catenin, a liquid detergent called Progress, and other scary-sounding chemicals, which doesn't sound edible at all. They're not supposed to be edible either, as not everything involved in the production line ends up in the food itself. Yet, some Soviet citizens treated this document as a recipe and adamantly refused to consume bread made with such yeast. Another urban legend claimed that the Soviet Union had its own Loch Ness monster. Allegedly, there's a dragon living in Lake Brosno in Tver Oblast, west of Moscow. The monster, Brosnia, apparently assaulted a Mongol army under Khan Batu, ate a Second World War German airplane, and has been witnessed several times by the locals. There were even a few photos of Brosnia taken, but on closer inspection, they belong to a swimming boar and a duck. Lake Brosno is indeed unusual, as it contains a sizable amount of hydrogen sulfides, which after physical contact can cause a reaction, making the water foam and smell of rotten eggs. It could be deemed scary as a result, but it's not exactly an ancient airplane-eating Nessie. Another legend, which has survived well into the modern day and basically became an internet creepypasta, is related to the Kola Super Deep borehole, the deepest human-made hole in the world. The borehole, a scientific experiment to see how deep a hole could actually be drilled, is 12 kilometers deep and is currently abandoned. The legend claims that in the 1980s, workers who operated the drill sent a microphone to its very bottom and recorded the terrible screams of thousands of people. The conclusion that was drawn was that they accidentally drilled their way into hell. You can even find the recording online, and honestly, it doesn't really sound like screams. The truth is, the equipment workers sent down into the hole wasn't a microphone at all, but one designed to record seismic waves. The sound recording is most likely fake, but this hasn't stopped stories of the screams of the damned from spreading far and wide. Different versions of this legend exist, with the fake recording being attributed to a different well to hell being drilled, but in Siberia instead of the Kola Peninsula. Now, since we're going underground anyway, let's talk about the Moscow Metro. This subway system has given rise to all sorts of myths and legends. One, for example, claims that there are giant mutant rats wandering its tunnels. Another story tells of secret mushroom plantations somewhere in the deep. Allegedly, once a month, a ghost train rides the Circle Line, filled with the souls of workers who died building it. Another story tells of a train driver whose train caught fire. He burned alive when saving passengers. His skin turned black, and to top it off, he was subsequently blamed for the fire. Since then, his spirit roams the Kaluzhno-Rishskaya line, calling for justice. That's the orange line for those of you who color code the Moscow Metro map. And lastly, my favorite Metro story is about Metro 2, a secret subway system about 100 meters deep, built for use by the elites in case of a nuclear war to allow rapid and safe movement between key government installations. Now, unlike most other stories, Metro 2 might actually be true, at least to some extent, although official confirmation of its existence has never been made. But the most famous of these Soviet urban legends is, of course, the Dyatlov Pass incident. To make a long story short, in 1959, a group of hikers led by Igor Dyatlov went skiing in the mountains of northern Urals and then died there, and nobody knows quite why. There are plenty of suggested theories, some of them involving avalanches, Mansi shamans, the KGB, a secret nuclear explosion, aliens, cryptids, and even Arctic dwarves. The Dyatlov Pass incident is a fascinating topic, and if you're interested in a more in-depth look at it, please check out our dedicated episode. So these urban myths we've just talked about largely originated in the Soviet Union, a place not exactly favorable to the free spread of information. However, after Gorbachev introduced his policies of glasnost, it became much easier to share news, real or fake. It also encouraged the emergence of informal groups devoted to anything from sport to politics. The most notorious of these groups was probably the Pamyat Society. It was a far-right, chauvinistic, and anti-Semitic group that spread, well, exactly the kind of conspiracy theories that you would expect. They even had a logo, which some members of our audience might recognize. The Pamyat Society largely disappeared in the 1990s as its members spread to other far-right groups. Speaking of the 1990s, the Soviet Union fell apart. Given how sudden and unexpected this event was, it became a breeding ground for all sorts of conspiracy theories. One of them, for example, claimed that the Communist Party leadership stole the Soviet gold reserves, laundered them in foreign banks, intentionally launched the fall of socialism, and then began to rule the newly independent capitalist countries as an oligarchic elite. A similar conspiracy theory also claims that the fall of the USSR was simply a facade, but in a different way. According to this story, the Soviet collapse was planned and directed by KGB leadership. The plan would include the introduction of capitalism in the most wild, unpleasant, and uncontrolled way possible, a popular backlash against the new democratic regime, and a rise of a popular autocrat who would bring back order, punish the oligarchs, and of course, be a loyal KGB asset. This is a very clear example of a conspiracy theory being created post facto to explain a series of traumatic events over which most people had little to no control. And yeah, speaking of Putin, his rise to power was itself accompanied by a series of unexplained terrorist attacks. In the autumn of 1999, there were several apartment bombings in Dagestan, Volgodonsk, and Moscow. The bombings were blamed on Chechen separatists, sparking the Second Chechen War, whose brutal victory greatly boosted Vladimir Putin's popularity. The thing is, whoever was behind the terrorist attacks was never found. Moreover, in the city of Ryazan, people noticed 3 unknown figures bringing large bags into the basement of a 12-story apartment building. The police discovered RDX explosives in the bags and detained the suspects. The FSB, however, claimed that those were just exercises and that the bags contained sugar. A theory emerged that the Russian intelligence services were behind the apartment bombings and that their goal was to present Putin as a brave fighter against terrorism. This whole story is highly suspicious and definitely deserves an independent investigation, yet technically the Ryazan sugar is a conspiracy theory. But let's move to something somewhat more lighthearted. The most bizarre attitude to the collapse of the Soviet Union is arguably denialism. Even today, tens of thousands of people believe that the USSR still formally exists, and that all the states that emerged after its fall, including Russia, are illegitimate and legally void. By 2020, these necro-communists formed over 50 different groups in Russia alone, and those have often looked more like religious sects than political movements. Their members often become victims of scammers themselves, who sell them fake Soviet passports, or pay them for services with worthless Soviet money. And if you think that this is weird, well, let's keep going. There's a whole variety of conspiracy theories related to history that should make the Finno-Korean hyperwar authors blush, but probably won't. Let's start with something mild, like the new chronology. This theory was developed by a mathematician, AT Fomenko. He claimed that the majority of historical narratives are forged, and that if different historical dynasties show an unusually close numerical proximity, then they were, in fact, the same dynasty. Using this method, Fomenko concluded that the Russian, Roman, Byzantine, and Frankish empires were the same state, that Belisarius and Suvorov were the same person, and that Jesus Christ was born in Crimea in the 12th century. And yeah, let's keep in mind that this is still relatively mild. Another text called Rose of the World was authored by Daniil Andreev, allegedly written in 1959 while he was in prison. There he presents a mythological picture of the world where large states are run by powerful demons called Ritsraors. Russia's Ritsraor is called Zhuger. Zhuger III to be precise, with the first two corresponding to the tsardoms of the Rukurids and then the Romanovs. Joseph Stalin, probably originally responsible for the author's imprisonment, is presented as a demonic tool who is also yet to be reborn as an antichrist. Now, both the New Chronology and the Rose of the World have attributable authors. The most widespread conspiracy theories, however, exist as tales, gaining new details with every new narrator. In Russia, this is the case with folk linguistics. Combined with neo-paganism and historical revisionism, it produced a whole variety of historical myths. They can include Russians being the same people as Etruscans, Russian language being the original language of the universe, an ancient Slavic Aryan Hyperborea, and frankly, the list could go on forever. This approach was popularized by Mikhail Zadornov, a popular stand-up comedian who called himself a pagan of the Aquarius era, whatever that means. What is prominent in these theories is the central theme of Russia's cultural and political legitimacy through its historical legacy. Another famous spreader of such narratives is Yuri Stepanovich Rybnikov, who became an internet meme after being featured in a video called "Science is a Means of Zombification of the Inhabitants of the Earth." I'm not making this up. There, Rybnikov presents his own mathematical model, the Count of the Ancient Russes, which Peter I allegedly replaced in the 18th century to rob people of their wealth. And this pseudo-historical, bordering on occult narratives almost made it directly into politics. A political movement, the Conceptual Party Unity, was formed around a conspiracy theory called Concept of Public Security, or KOB. Its doctrine is an esoteric reading of a 19th century poem, Ruslan and Ludmila, which is presented as an ancient Vedic text. They also loved Stalin. Even the name of the theory, Kob, is a reference to Stalin's nickname, Koba. The party members can be vaguely called pagan Stalinists, who also believe in the Judeo-Masonic conspiracy, hate Christianity, hate Lenin, occasionally praise Hitler, and honestly, they look like Nazis with a few extra steps. This party took part in the 2003 legislative election and gained 1.17% of the popular vote, failing to make it to the State Duma. Currently, the Conceptual Party Unity is disbanded, and some of its literature is banned by the Russian government. Apparently, even they have standards. So, the most nonsensical and bizarre Russian conspiracy theories didn't make it into politics. That's good, right? Well, there's still a small problem. Some more grounded, but still dangerous theories did make it into the Russian political sphere. The most notorious of them is the Dulles Plan. This document was allegedly produced by CIA Director Allen Dulles. It presents a plan of weakening the Soviet Union through moral degradation of its citizens. Dulles allegedly proposed focusing on youth and turning them into cynics, vulgars, and cosmopolites. The text originates, well, definitely not from Allen Dulles. It can be first encountered in a 1964 Soviet spy novel, At the Black Knights, where the lines belong to the main villain, American General Dumbright. Yet, plenty of people don't bother checking sources, and some of those people happen to be politicians. The Dulles Plan has been referenced by a number of political luminaries, including the governor of Saratov, Nikolai Merkushkin, the right-wing politician Vladimir Zhirinovsky, and most recently, permanent representative of Russia to the EU, Vladimir Chizhov. At last, if we discuss conspiracy theorists among the Russian elites, we have to mention Alexander Dugin. His works are more of an attempt at philosophy and geopolitics than obvious conspiracist nonsense, but they have some relation to the topic of this video nonetheless. For example, he presents history as an eternal struggle between the land and the sea. The United States is shown as the leading sea force, which allegedly tries to create a new world order. There, according to Dugin, everything would be under control of a global government, market liberalism, and secret societies. This New World Order, and frankly all of the conspiracy theories we've mentioned today, are just a fraction of myths and legends that still exist in Russia, with many new ones being invented every month. One of them, for example, claims that the viewers who subscribe to our channel and press the bell button get invited into a secret YouTube society where they won't miss any of our future videos. But it's just a theory, probably another bell button attempt to overwrite the laws of mathematics. In any case, please consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/thecoldwar or through YouTube membership. We can be reached via email at thecoldwarchannel@gmail.com. This is the Cold War Channel, and as we think about the Cold War, please remember that history is shades of gray and rarely black and white.